Your blood is missing something. One single letter of code gone from your DNA, and that one missing letter is the entire reason you are type O. Not added, not extra, missing. And that missing letter has been quietly deciding who lives and who dies for longer than humans have existed on this planet. If you are type O positive, what I am about to tell you is not folklore. It is not a personality quiz. It is not a blood type diet. It is what your own genetic code says about where you came from, what nearly killed your ancestors, and why doctors reach for your blood first in an emergency. Stay until the end, because the last part of this story is the part almost nobody knows, and it changes how you will look at your own blood forever. For most of human history, blood was just blood. Red, warm, and the same in everyone, or so people believed. Doctors tried transferring blood from one person to another to save lives, and sometimes it worked. And sometimes the patient died within minutes, screaming in pain, their own body attacking the blood that was supposed to save them. Nobody understood why. The same procedure, the same red liquid, and yet one patient lived while another died, right there on the table. For centuries, this stayed a complete mystery. Nobody could see what was actually happening, because the answer was invisible, hidden inside the blood itself, written in a code nobody yet knew how to read. It was only at the start of the 20th century that a scientist noticed something strange while mixing blood samples in glass dishes. Some samples, when combined, stayed smooth and liquid. Others clumped together into thick, ugly clots right in front of his eyes. That single observation cracked open one of the biggest secrets in the human body. From those clumps came the letters we still use today, A, B, AB, and O. Finally, doctors had a way to explain why some transfusions killed and others healed. But even then, nobody knew what those letters actually meant at the deepest level. They were just labels stuck onto a mystery. It would take almost 100 more years and the invention of tools that could read DNA letter by letter before anyone could point to the exact spot in the human genome and say, this, right here, is what makes you O. So let's start with the biggest misunderstanding people have about their own blood type. Most people imagine A, B, and O as 3 different flavors, 3 different ingredients added to your blood, like recipes. That is completely wrong. Here is what is actually happening inside you. There's a single gene sitting on chromosome 9, and this gene contains the instructions for building a tiny enzyme. Think of this enzyme as a microscopic worker whose only job, all day, every day, inside every red blood cell you have, is to attach a specific sugar molecule onto the surface of that cell. In someone with type A blood, this worker attaches one kind of sugar. In someone with type B, a slightly different sugar. But in a person with type O blood, something completely different happens. The worker is broken. He shows up, he has his tools, but he cannot attach anything at all. So the surface of your red blood cells stays plain, bare, undecorated. This is the part that surprises almost everyone once they understand it properly. O is not something you have that A and B do not have. O is an absence. It is what is left when something goes missing. Scientists have traced this down to an incredibly specific location in the gene, close to position 261, where a single unit of genetic code, just one, has been deleted, one missing piece out of thousands. And that one deletion is enough to scramble everything that comes after it, the same way deleting a single letter from the middle of a sentence turns every word after it into nonsense. The enzyme built from these scrambled instructions cannot do its job. It cannot attach the sugar. And so if you carry type O blood, your red blood cells are walking around with no marking, no flag, none of the chemical decoration that A and B cells proudly display. Researchers suspected something like this for years before they could actually prove it. It was only once they had the tools to sequence this gene letter by letter that they lined up the code from someone with type A blood next to the code from someone with type O blood, and there it was, staring back at them, the missing piece. A single deleted letter separating one blood type from another. No fireworks in the lab, just numbers appearing on a screen. But in that quiet moment, a mystery that had confused doctors and killed patients for generations was finally solved. The reason type O blood behaves the way it does, the reason it carries no markings, the reason it can be given so widely, all of it traced back to one missing letter in a genetic code that is 3 billion letters long. Now here is something almost nobody realizes about their own blood type card. When you say you are O positive, you are actually reading 2 completely separate stories stitched together. The O has nothing to do with the positive, nothing at all. The positive part comes from a totally different gene, sitting on a completely different chromosome, chromosome 1, and it controls a completely different protein, sitting on your red blood cells, called the D antigen, more commonly known as the rhesus factor. If your cells carry this protein, you are positive. If they don't, you're negative. So when your blood type is written down as O positive, Your DNA is not making one statement about you, it's making two from two unrelated genes switched on independently that just happen to end up in the same body and get written on the same card. You are not one single instruction from your DNA. You are the meeting point of two ancient, unrelated decisions. And this is where the story stops sounding like simple biology and starts sounding almost impossible to believe. You might assume that human blood types developed somewhere in our own history, maybe as our ancestors spread out across different continents and different climates. That is not what the evidence shows. Scientists have a specific term for what they actually found, called transspecies polymorphism, and that phrase is hiding one of the most extraordinary facts about the human body. It means the difference between blood types is older than the human species itself. The version of this gene running through your blood right now already existed, in some form, inside a creature that lived tens of millions of years ago. Not a human, not even close to a human. The shared ancestor of both humans and chimpanzees. A creature that lived in a world we would not recognize, surrounded by animals that no longer exist, with absolutely no way of knowing that one of its distant descendants would one day sit and learn that its own blood carried a code that old. If you are type O, you are not carrying a modern trait. You are carrying an inheritance so old it survived every ice age, every mass extinction near miss, every migration your ancestors ever made, every disaster that nearly wiped out the human lineage completely, and it arrived in you, intact, unbroken. That raises an obvious question. Why would something this old survive for so long? Evolution does not keep things around out of sentiment. It is ruthless. When a trait sticks around for millions of years, refusing to disappear, refusing to be replaced by something else, it usually means that trait is doing something important, something worth the cost of keeping it. So scientists started asking a deeper question. What does blood type actually do, beyond just decorating red blood cells with sugar? And the answer they found is the reason your blood type may have quietly decided whether your ancestors lived long enough to have children at all. Here's the key idea. The markings on your blood cells are not just seen by your own body. They are seen by every bacteria, virus, and parasite that has ever hunted the human species. To these invaders, your blood type is like a door. Sometimes it's locked, sometimes it's wide open, and no disease demonstrates this better than malaria, one of the deadliest killers in human history, a disease that has shaped human evolution more than almost anything else on the planet. The parasite behind the worst form of malaria has a brutal trick. Once it gets inside a red blood cell, it makes that cell sticky. So infected cells start clumping together with healthy ones, forming dense clusters that jam up the narrow blood vessels in your body, especially the ones feeding your brain. This clumping is exactly what turns malaria from a bad fever into a death sentence. But here is where your blood type quietly enters the story. In people with type O blood, the bare, unmarked red cells make it much harder for the parasite to build these deadly clusters. The clumping is weaker. The blockage is less severe. Study after study, done in regions where malaria has been a constant threat for thousands of years, has found that people with type O blood tend to survive severe malaria more often than people with type A blood. And this is not old, outdated research either. New studies are still confirming this pattern right now. One recent study looking at children with severe falciparum malaria found that carrying type O blood was linked to a dramatically lower chance of the disease turning severe compared to other blood types. Researchers working in regions across Africa in the last couple of years have continued to find that patients with blood group A tend to develop the worst, most dangerous forms of malarial illness, while type O patients tend to come through with a real, measurable advantage. Some newer research has even proposed using type O blood specifically as a treatment tool for critically ill malaria patients, precisely because it resists the clumping that makes the disease so deadly, and because it can be given to almost anyone without triggering a dangerous immune reaction. Not every single study agrees. Some newer trials involving soldiers on strong malaria prevention medication found no clear difference by blood type, because when you're already protected by drugs and bed nets, the natural genetic protection has less room to matter. But across dozens of studies over decades, in places where malaria runs wild without modern medicine to blunt it, the pattern keeps showing up again and again. Type O gives you an edge. Think about what that meant in the real world, for real families, generation after generation, long before hospitals or medicine existed. In a world where malaria killed children before they were old enough to have children of their own, even a small survival advantage was enough to matter enormously. A blood type that gave you a slightly better chance of living through a malaria infection was a blood type that got passed down over and over, century after century. And that may be a major part of the reason that type O is the single most common blood type on planet Earth today. But nature is never generous without also being cruel somewhere else. The same bare, unmarked cells that protect you from one enemy can leave a completely different door unlocked for another. The story of type O blood is not a simple story of one blood type being better than the rest. It's a story of trade-offs, written across millions of years, and your DNA carries evidence of both sides of that ledger. There's more written into your blood, and some of it has nothing to do with ancient diseases at all, but with the quieter risks of the modern body. Deep in the chemistry of your blood sits a delicate balancing act between bleeding too easily and clotting too dangerously. Your body walks that line every single day of your life, and it turns out your blood type helps decide which side of that line you naturally lean toward. People with type O blood tend to carry lower levels of certain clotting proteins, particularly one called von Willebrand factor, along with its partner, factor VIII. These are the substances your body relies on to form clots whenever you're injured. In type O individuals, these levels run measurably lower than in people with type A, type B, or type AB blood. The result is subtle, but very real. On average, type O blood is somewhat less prone to forming the kind of dangerous internal clots that can break loose, travel to the lungs, and kill without warning. The same kind of clots that sit behind many strokes and certain heart attacks. Your ancient bare-celled malaria-resistant blood also happens to lean slightly away from the clotting problems that plague the modern heart. But once again, the ledger has two sides. That same lower level of clotting protein means that when type O individuals do bleed, whether from an injury, from surgery, or from something like a stomach ulcer, they may bleed somewhat more heavily than people with other blood types. Which brings us to the stomach and to a bacterium living inside the guts of billions of people worldwide, called Helicobacter pylori, which burrows into the stomach lining and can trigger painful ulcers. Research has repeatedly noticed that people with type O blood appear somewhat more likely to develop certain peptic ulcers, and the leading theory is that the same bare cell surface, paired with matching markings inside the stomach lining, gives this particular bacterium an easier foothold to grab onto. Now, since we're being completely honest here, we need to walk through some of the myths that have grown up around blood types, because your DNA has quietly demolished several of the most popular beliefs out there, and understanding the difference between real science and comforting stories is part of really understanding your own body. The most famous myth by far is the idea that people with type O blood should eat like ancient hunters, that because O is supposedly the oldest and most primal blood type. Its carriers thrive on heavy meat diets and struggle to properly digest grains, and that following a specific blood type diet will unlock better health and more energy. It's a seductive idea. It feels intuitive. It has sold millions of books worldwide. But when scientists actually put this claim through rigorous testing, comparing people who followed blood type-based diets against people who didn't, they found something interesting. The diets did sometimes genuinely improve people's health, just not for the reason anyone claimed. The improvements happened regardless of a person's actual blood type. A type A person and a type O person following the exact same so-called correct diet both improved by roughly the same amount, which is precisely the pattern you'd expect if blood type had nothing to do with it whatsoever. And the real benefit was simply coming from eating more carefully overall. Your DNA does not support the blood type diet. The idea that your blood type dictates what you should eat is a comforting story laid on top of a reality that simply doesn't contain it. Think about what your blood type has allowed you to become in the modern world too, because here, that ancient bareness of your cells takes on an entirely new and generous meaning. Since your red blood cells carry no A markings and no B markings, they don't trigger the alarm that those markings set off inside other people's immune systems. This is exactly why type O blood, and especially type O negative, has earned the title of universal donor, blood that can, in a genuine emergency, be given to people of many other blood types without causing the dangerous, sometimes fatal reactions that mismatched blood can trigger. When a patient is bleeding out in an emergency room, when there's no time left to run blood tests, when every second matters, it is very often type O blood that doctors reach for first, because it is the safest option available, the blood least likely to be rejected by an unfamiliar body. The very absence that defines you at the genetic level, that one missing letter, that broken enzyme, that bare, unmarked surface, becomes, in a true moment of crisis, the exact reason you might be able to save a complete stranger's life. What was a subtraction inside your genetic code becomes an addition out in the real world. The nothing sitting on your cells becomes everything to somebody else in their worst moment. There's a quiet kind of poetry in that, and it is genuinely worth sitting with for a second. Your blood type was never designed. It was never chosen by anyone. It arrived through an unbroken chain of accidents and evolutionary pressure, stretching back long before humanity even existed, shaped by parasites you will never see and ancestors you will never meet or know anything about. And yet somehow it ended up making you, in a very real and measurable way, one of the great givers of the modern medical world. A person whose blood can flow directly into the veins of a complete stranger and pull them back from the edge of death. The malaria that hunted your ancestors, the plagues that wiped out the vulnerable, the harsh arithmetic of survival that kept this deletion alive generation after generation, all of it worked together, without ever intending to eventually produce a type of blood that can be given freely to almost anyone on Earth. History wrote a gift into your body, and it didn't even mean to. So when your DNA is finally read all the way through, letter by letter, and the full truth about type O positive blood is laid completely bare, here's what it actually reveals. It doesn't reveal a diet you have to follow. It doesn't reveal a personality you're supposed to fit into. It doesn't reveal some secret ancestry connected to the stars. It reveals something quieter, and honestly something far more real than any of that. It reveals that you carry a variation older than your own species, a deletion so ancient it predates the human face entirely. It reveals that this one small change in your code once stood directly between your ancestors and one of the deadliest diseases the world has ever produced, tilting the odds of survival just enough that your bloodline continued while countless others vanished along the way. It reveals a chemistry that leans slightly away from the dangerous clots that threaten the modern human heart, a set of trade-offs bargained across deep time between protection and vulnerability, between malaria and cholera, between clotting and bleeding, each one a faint whisper of the pressures your particular bloodline once faced and survived. And finally, it reveals that the very emptiness of your cells, the absence carved into your blood by one broken enzyme, is the exact same emptiness that lets you become a universal giver, a person whose blood is able to cross the boundaries that normally separate one human being from another. That is the actual truth your DNA has revealed, and it completely reframes the whole question. We spend so much of our lives imagining that whatever makes us special must be something added, some extra gift, some bonus tucked into us that other people simply don't have. But the story of type O blood suggests something far more powerful than that. Sometimes what makes you extraordinary isn't what you have, it's what you lack. Not the sugar that got added, but the sugar that's completely absent. Not something present, but a surface left genuinely bare. In a strange and honestly beautiful twist, your own blood is telling you that an absence can become an inheritance, that one missing letter can turn into a form of protection, that a subtraction can become a gift big enough to save another person's life. So the next time you look at your blood type printed on a hospital form, on an ID card, on a donor bracelet, and you read those simple characters, O positive, remember what they're actually made of. Remember that the O is not a flavor added to your blood. It's an absence. A single missing letter located near position 261 inside a gene sitting on chromosome 9. A deletion so old it is shared with creatures that lived tens of millions of years before the very first human being ever took a breath. Remember that the positive part comes from somewhere else entirely. A completely separate gene on a completely separate chromosome, a second and totally unrelated decision that simply happens to share your body with the first one. Remember that this exact combination, this quiet coincidence between two ancient genetic switches, once helped your ancestors survive diseases that were actively hunting them, and still today shapes the delicate balance between clotting and bleeding running through your body right now, and still today makes your blood one of the most freely givable substances in all of modern medicine. And remember, above everything else, that none of this was ever designed specifically for you, and yet, somehow, all of it still arrived safely inside you, the endpoint of a story that stretches back millions of years, a story you never wrote yourself, but one that is written permanently into every single cell you carry. Because that is the real truth your DNA reveals, once we finally learn how to read it properly. Not a fantasy, not a fad diet, not some secret destiny written among the stars. Something better than any of that. It reveals that the blood running through your veins is a living record of survival older than humanity itself, shaped by ancient plagues most people have never even heard of, carefully balanced between danger and protection, and generous enough, in the end, to be given away freely to save the lives of complete strangers. It reveals that you are not the beginning of anything new. You are the continuation of everything that came before you, an unbroken thread reaching back long before the dawn of your own species. And the proof of that is not hidden away in the sky, and it's not hidden in some secret bloodline either. It's sitting quietly, ordinarily, and extraordinarily in a single missing letter, carried faithfully through countless generations, and beating right now inside of you.